Evio.
This series contains adult language and depictions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi, I'm Bruce.
And I'm Jeff. Welcome to Taboo Treasures, a weekly podcast that explores the human obsession with objects of extreme rarity and infamy.
Today's episode, Halloween in Hollywood. Some people say the slasher genre got its start in 1960 with the movie Psycho, but purists don't necessarily consider it a true slasher movie. It still stands out from the rest of the genre for a lot of reasons, though. Its main claim to fame is Alfred Hitchcock, of course, who is definitely in running for best director ever.
Yeah, and it wasn't until 14 years later that the movie most people considered the father of the slasher genre changed everything. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
It was shot in 20 days on an original budget of $60,000, but ended up being about double that, which is still really cheap. The director, Tobe Hooper, had only made one film before, a low-budget experimental thing that no one ever saw.
Chainsaw was a brutal, violent scream fest about some kids who stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time. But after it came out, Hooper became a horror director star, and he directed movies like Invaders from Mars, Salem's Lot, and Poltergeist.
Hooper got the idea for the movie when he was Christmas shopping, of course. He was in a department store packed with shoppers, and when he saw a bunch of chainsaws on display, he had a little fantasy of firing one up and carving his way out of the crowd.
Yeah, he said his take on Leatherface's character was that he was just a big baby who did what his family told him to do.
Yeah, Leatherface is inspired by the real-life serial killer Ed Gein, who peeled off women's skin and wore it as a mask. We've talked about Gein in our Murderabilia episode, and actually we've talked about him a lot.
Yeah, make it out what you will.
I don't know why. Yeah.
There's some classic kills in the movie, but only one character is actually killed by a chainsaw. Leatherface was notable as the first horror movie villain to use machinery as a weapon. But as bloody as its reputation is, there really isn't much blood on screen at all.
Yeah. But years after the movie came out, the cast and crew found out that the distributor was owned by the mafia. And apparently they used chainsaw to launder profits from the movie Deep Throat. So they got sued and got an extra $25,000 each.
And most critics wrote it off as cheap sleaze, but some people saw something in Hooper's direction, like even Stephen King, who said, "I would happily testify to its redeeming social merit in any court in the country."
Chainsaw was a major inspiration for a lot of classic horror films, and one of them changed everything about the slasher film genre. It was 1978, and the movie was John Carpenter's Halloween, the subject of our podcast. It's hard to believe how many A-list stars got their starts in low-budget horror movies. The list is kind of nuts, but we've narrowed it down to a few that we really like.
Yeah, if you can believe this, George Clooney's first movie was Grizzly 2, Revenge, in 1983. It wasn't even the original Grizzly.
Wasn't Charlie Sheen in that?
Yeah, I think he was in the same one with Clooney and Laura Dern.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Clooney's next film was another horror film called Return to Horror High, which is also pretty much what it sounds like. And it's another one that wasn't even the original.
And he also did the Revenge of Tomatoes or something.
Oh, no, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
I mean, he has the best ones, I think, the best cheesy ones. But this one's not cheesy. Sissy Spacek's first role was her huge breakout in Carrie, one of the biggest and best horror films ever made. I mean, my wife and daughter can't go a year without seeing it. But she almost never got an audition because the director, Brian De Palma, had already settled on an actress named Betsy Slade. She's bummed she didn't get that job.
I was just thinking the same thing. The only reason she got the audition at all was because Her husband was a production designer named Jack Fisk, who'd worked with De Palma before, and he asked him if he'd give his wife an audition anyway, just as sort of as a favor. And, the rest is history.
Speaking of Carrie, another young actor who'd never been in a movie also had a starring role. Before he was cast as one of the bullies who tormented Carrie, he was only known for his work on the first season on a sitcom. The show was Welcome Back, Kotter, and the actor was John Travolta.
Kevin Bacon's another star who got his start in horror. Right after Halloween was a big hit in '78, a director named Sean Cunningham managed to raise about $600,000 to shoot a film he wanted to direct. When it was done, the studios went wild and started a bidding war over it.
The movie was Friday the 13th, and after it came out, Kevin Bacon did Footloose and became a huge star, and Friday the 13th became one of the most successful horror franchises in history. Tom Hanks came out of nowhere to become one of the biggest TV stars in America with Bosom Buddies.
Which was a great show.
Yeah. But his first movie role came just before that in a low-budget slasher film called He Knows You're Alone.
The slasher, so random. The slasher's a murderer who's stalking a bride because he only stalks brides. Brides seem like a kind of limited audience for being scared of a slasher, but it worked and made a ton of money against its low budget.
Renee Zellweger was in a couple successful films in 1993 and 1994, but you can't even really call them roles. She was in Dazed and Confused, but her part was so small she wasn't even credited. And she was in Reality Bites just long enough for her to kiss Ethan Hawke. Lucky her.
She had a few more roles after that, but her breakout was a Texas Chainsaw horror comedy sequel called The Return of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
All right.
Which also starred Matthew McConaughey in only his second starring role after his breakout in Dazed and Confused.
So probably the most famous casting story is the one that John Carpenter didn't want. Jamie Lee Curtis. Carpenter said he had no idea who she was. She was 19 and in a TV show at the time, but he didn't watch TV.
But to her credit, his co-writer Deborah Hill fought him on it. She saw a talented kid who she thought was earmarked for stardom, and she admitted from a financial business point of view, it didn't exactly hurt that she was Janet Leigh and Tony Curtis's daughter.
The producer, Frank Yablans, loved the idea so much that he told Carpenter to create a scene that would be a callback to her mom's famous shower scene in Psycho so they could run a side-by-side photo to promote the movie.
Jamie Lee became a horror darling right after Halloween, but the movie that really made her career was Trading Places with Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd. And we don't want to get too...
Oh, yeah, we do. Come on.
Well...
The boob shot.
As great as her performance was, and it really was great, she's best remembered, at least by men.
By men. And maybe some women.
Some women, for taking off her shirt. Oh, America. Anyway, it worked, and the rest is legit Hollywood stardom.
The story of Halloween, the movie, started when Yablans had an idea for a horror movie called The Babysitter Murders. He was just starting out himself, and he thought he could do it cheaply over a couple of weeks if they kept the locations to a minimum and set most of it at night so they wouldn't need big lighting setups.
Yeah, meanwhile, Carpenter's career was getting underway. His first movie was a horror comedy in 1974 called Dark Star. It started out as a USC student film that he and some friends shot over 2 years, and they just kept expanding and expanding with reshoots, and eventually it actually got a release in 1973.
It didn't do too much at the box office, but it got Carpenter enough attention to get him hired to direct a film in 1978 called Assault on Precinct 13. Precinct 13 had a cool story of its own. It was based on a true childhood story that Alfred Hitchcock, one of Carpenter's idols, told the legendary French New Wave director Francois Truffaut about it. I bet you didn't see that.
Well, anyway, Assault didn't do that well, but it became a cult classic, and it got Carpenter his first real Hollywood movie in 1978, a supernatural thriller called The Eyes of Laura Mars. And we say real because Tommy Lee Jones and Faye Dunaway starred in it, and it was distributed by Columbia.
But Carpenter was still struggling. Yablans had seen his work, and he offered to hand over the premise of the idea to Carpenter if he'd write it and direct it. Carpenter didn't like the idea, but he needed the work. So he said he'd do it on a budget of $300,000, which Yablon loved. But Carpenter wanted final cut and his name above the title. Yablons gave it to him, and they agreed to change the title to Halloween.
So Carpenter and Yablons put together a 21-day shoot with mostly inexperienced kids to save money. So here are some little bits and pieces you probably didn't know about it.
First of all, it was co-written and produced by a woman. Deborah Hill had been a script supervisor, but Carpenter hired her to co-write Halloween with him. She ended up doing most of the work, and it launched her writing and producing careers.
And she even played Michael Myers in 2 scenes, but to be fair, 6 different people eventually ended up playing him. That's still a pretty good one.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem so unusual now, but at the time, Carpenter went way, way out on a limb by hiring a woman with no experience. It didn't help that she also happened to be his girlfriend.
Oh.
But, she really delivered, and they actually went on to become great filmmaking partners.
Over the years, she co-wrote and or produced a bunch of classics like The Fog, Escape from New York, which we love, The Dead Zone we love, and The Adventures in Babysitting. Even though women had been doing great work behind the cameras for years by then, Hill was an early champion of women in the modern age.
Yeah, this is a direct quote from her. She said, "Women in powerful positions were perceived in a sexist way. They did love stories. For a woman to come and do a film like Halloween really paved the way for other women to be viewed as filmmakers and good storytellers first, as opposed to just being women producers."
Yeah, the story of The Mask is great too.
Yeah.
Like everything else, they had just about nothing to spend on it. Tommy Lee Wallace, the production designer, went to a costume shop on Hollywood Boulevard and bought some cheap masks to use as a starting point. They tried everything, sad clowns, werewolves, and even Nixon.
But there was one mask that stood out, so he shelled out the $1.98 for it and brought it back to the shop. And when they widened the eye holes, shaved off the sideburns and eyebrows, and they spray painted the hair dark brown and painted the face white, everyone knew instantly that this was the one. It was scarier and creepier than anything else they'd tried. And that's how Captain Kirk became the literal face of Halloween.
Beam me up, Scotty. So we're going to talk about the 4-minute opening shot a little here. At the time, for the most part, if you wanted a lengthy shot with a lot of movement and action, you had to figure out how to do it with cranes and dollies and other special equipment. But then came the Steadicam.
Yeah, if you've never seen one, it's a wearable but heavy camera rig that allows the cameraman to move freely. You walk, turn, raise and lower the camera. Basically, there are no restrictions. It's complicated, but it makes for smooth tracking shots that can go on and on until the film runs out or the cameraman collapses.
They become a part of the language of film, but at the time when Halloween was made, only a couple movies like Rocky and Bound for Glory had used them. It was expensive and it required a specialized operator. Still does. But Carpenter wanted one, and he was willing to make every trade-off he could to get the extra money.
Yeah, he and the cinematographer and the Steadicam operator had come up with this opening shot that would start across the street, look into the house from the side, go in through the kitchen, up the steps, into a bedroom, and back down the steps and out the front door. And he got a shot.
But it wasn't just a technical breakthrough, and it's not just a crucial scene. The shot was the birth of the stalking killer POV trope. And the story of how they pulled it off is as funny as how great the shot is. What we don't see are all the crew members who are hustling just ahead and just behind the cameras to change out lighting setups and then change them back when the camera passed back by.
Yeah, they also had to whitewash the rundown 1978 version of the house the night before they shot it to make it look like the more shiny and new 1963 version. Of course, they had no money to do that with, so some of the cast also helped with that. And given the time crunch, they could only fix exactly what they absolutely had to, so the camera operator had like no room for error.
Yeah, Tommy Lee Wallace said, "Believe me, if you pan the camera a little to the right or a little to the left, it was just an old, skanky house. It was only nice through the lens. Just that much wallpaper, just that much chandelier, just that much kitchen table with a nice setting on it. Everywhere else was just a trashed out old house."
Halloween set the have sex you die template that dominated a lot of the weirdly moralistic horror stuff of the 80s and even the 90s. Siskel and Ebert actually both liked Halloween, and later they thought the slasher craze reflected the unconscious and sometimes very conscious misogyny of the men making the movie.
But at the same time, it represented a rejection of the sexual revolution and the women's movement of the past 20 years. Some other writers saw it differently. 14 years after it came out, one of them was a woman named Carol J. Clover, an academic who wrote a book called Men, Women, and Chainsaws, Gender in the Modern Horror Film.
Yeah. Well, she had a really different perspective, and she actually saw the value and uniqueness of a series of movies which almost without fail came down to strong women defeating murderous men. Going back to Chainsaw, its only survivor was a woman, so technically it started the final girl horror trope. But she felt that Halloween really cemented that trope and turned the story over to a heroine instead of a hero.
Sometimes critics try to read all the meaning and politics and symbolism and references and social commentary embedded in authors' intentions, and Halloween's a pretty funny example. Of course, if you ask Carpenter and Deborah Hill, they'd tell you they wanted to make a scary movie about the boogeyman, and they fought back against all pseudo-intellectual crap.
Yeah, Carpenter said, "What the fuck is this? It wasn't my intention to make a moral point." He figured that if people wanted to read that much into it, why not at least give them credit for reversing the phallic symbolism by having Laurie stab Michael repeatedly at the end? He said, "It's a backward twist. She's the one who sticks it in."
Hill thought the same thing. She said the people who mentioned that in reviews applied their own morality to it. I thought they were being ridiculously introspective about a film that was meant to have no social statement. There wasn't any cerebral thinking about making this movie. In an old interview in Fangoria magazine, she explained what she was really thinking about when she wrote the script.
Yeah, she said the idea was that you couldn't kill evil, and that's how we came up with the story. So we went back to this old idea of Samhain, that Halloween was the night where all the souls are let out to wreak havoc on the living. And then we came up with the story about the most evil kid who ever lived.
And when John came up with this fable of a town with a dark secret of someone who once lived there, and now that evil has come back, that's what made Halloween work. We wanted to be like a Jack-in-the-Box. We didn't want it to be gory.
His approach was focused on the atmosphere and building tension and suspense as a filmmaker, rather than relying on a bunch of bloody kills. They did create that Jack-in-the-Box effect that Hill talked about. Carpenter built on psychological fear, and that made the scares more effective and memorable, and they did it with really very little on-screen blood.
Yeah, Hill was thinking about Hitchcock, though. She grew up in an actual small town herself, so she wanted to do for small town suburbia what Rear Window did for urban apartments. She said, "What inspired me was Rear Window, where you pull off the veneer and have a peek inside each of the apartments."
She said if there was any kind of sexual commentary, at best it was unconsciously influenced by her Catholic upbringing.
Donald Pleasance was their third choice for detective. Yablans, Hill, and Carpenter wanted a name for business reasons, so they offered the part to Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing, who both passed.
But Yablans was actually relieved. He recommended Pleasance because he was already a name, but he also thought he brought a little more legitimacy and class to the project than Lee and Cushing would have.
Pleasance didn't end up making the decision, though. Here's how he put it to Carpenter on the first day of shooting. "My daughter is in a rock and roll band in London, and she liked the music from your film Assault on Precinct 13. But otherwise, I have no clue why I'm here and who my character is."
In the end, it was great on set and everyone loved him, but they had to pay him $25,000 or $5,000 a day for 5 days' work. To put that in perspective, Nick Castle, who played Mike Myers, made $25 a day. You really can't talk about Halloween without mentioning The Wizard of Oz. We think it's one of the greatest movies ever made, and we'd love to hear what you think too.
Yeah, please tell us by reaching out to us at Taboo Treasures on Instagram and TikTok, or you can email us at tabootreasures@eviocreative.com. We'll come back to Halloween and the slasher movies in a minute, but first we're going to talk about some of our favorite movies to watch on Halloween.
Dime, why you do this to me?
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
Your mother sucks cocks in hell, Paris, you faithless swine.
Your Mother Sucks Cocks in Hell should be the name of a band. So The Exorcist, as everyone with a pulse knows, is the Mac Daddy of supernatural horror thrillers, and it predates the Halloween movie by 5 years. It's still one of the most watched and talked about horror films ever, and believe me, if you haven't seen it recently, it's still as scary as the day it came out.
Reagan's spinning head and green vomit gets the headlines, and for good reason. But the fact is, if you go back and watch it carefully, you'll see what incredibly simple ways director William Friedkin used to create terror. The Exorcist was Friedkin's follow-up to The French Connection, which is one of my favorite movies, and it also won him an Academy Award for Best Director.
Here's Johnny.
When it comes to sheer talent, The Shining is an embarrassment of riches. It was a big hit as a novel, so there were high expectations for the film in 1980. And of course, those expectations went through the roof when Stanley Kubrick and Jack Nicholson were announced, and they didn't disappoint because, well, it was Kubrick and Jack Nicholson.
Yeah.
Shelley Duvall was also incredible.
Whatever you do, don't fall asleep. Hello?
I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy.
By the time Wes Craven wrote and directed Nightmare on Elm Street in 1984, he had already made a couple of horror films, starting in 1972 with The Last House on the Left. It didn't do very well, but it established him in the horror genre, and the Elm Street franchises have grossed somewhere around $450 million and became one of the most successful horror franchises of all time.
Yeah, and a lot of people know that Elm Street was Johnny Depp's first movie, but it was also the very first audition he ever did.
Someone knows you've watched it. And what they say is, you will die in 7 days.
Don't you understand, Rachel? She never sleeps.
The Ring uses the pass along the curse trope. If you watch a certain videotape with a very horrifying little girl in it, you become cursed, and in 7 days she comes for you. And if you don't think that sounds scary, you haven't seen it.
The director, Gore Verbinski, had only done 2 films before The Ring, Mouse Hunt and The Mexican, which were both comedies. And then out of nowhere, he made one of the most memorable scary movies of its time.
And that was the last horror movie that Verbinski did. He left horror to direct 3 Pirates of the Caribbean movies and The Lone Ranger, among others.
Oh, yes. There will be blood.
How much blood will you shed to stay alive, Michael? Live or die? Make your choice.
This one is bloody. It's Saw, and it uses the one-room dungeon trope with 2 alive guys and 1 dead one between them.
There's a ticking clock, literally, while a serial killer puts them through a series of tests. They have to figure out how to escape before a timer runs out. 6 people are killed, but if you have a weak stomach, you don't want to know how. You just don't.
It was the first film James Wan directed, and since then he's become one of the most successful filmmakers in history in any genre. The original Saw movie alone grossed over $1 billion worldwide.
To give you an idea of how successful Wan has been since then, just his Insidious franchise alone has grossed $750 million on a combined budget of $50 million. And his Conjuring franchise is the most successful horror franchise of all time, with $2 billion, with a B, dollars. And here's a couple great horror comedies that again really stand out for the quality and the talent of the filmmakers and cast. And we do Scary Movie. Go ahead.
Scary Movie has one of those plots that could have been really frightening and disturbing. It's about some high school kids who accidentally kill someone and get rid of the body, and then a year later, a mass killer starts to stalk them. But no, it's a parody that makes fun of just about every horror trope you can think of.
Yeah. Keenan Ivory Wayans co-wrote it with his brothers Marlon and Sean, who also starred in it. He directed the first one in 2020, as well as the first 2 sequels. The franchise has grossed about $900 million worldwide.
Are you a ghost too?
I'm the ghost with the most, babe.
Beetlejuice? Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice.
It's showtime.
I remember when that came out. I never saw anything like it.
No, nobody had. And it's another one of those examples of Michael Keaton's range. I mean,
and Tim Burton's vision.
The whole cast was incredible.
Yeah, who's the guy who did the score? Danny Elfman's score.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
But if you haven't seen the movie, which you should, it's about a couple who die in a car accident. Wait, it gets funnier, and they end up haunting their own house. They hate the morons that bought it, so they figured that since they're ghosts, they'll just scare them out. But they're terrible at being scary. So they call up a spirit to help them, and that spirit's got game, to say the least.
Yeah, like we were saying, the filmmakers and cast are a who's who of some of the best of the best. We talked about Tim Burton and Danny Elfman and Michael Keaton, but it also has Winona Ryder, Gina Davis, Alec Baldwin, Jeffrey Jones, Catherine O'Hara. Yeah.
Pretty great movie.
Yeah.
Horror franchises are like superhero movies. They cross-pollinate and mix and match stories and characters. All the way back in 1943, Universal did a movie called Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, with Bela Lugosi as Frankenstein and Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman. Now they pop up all the time, Alien vs. Predator or Freddy vs. Jason. And speaking of Jason, that brings us back to the subject of today's podcast, the original, the best, Halloween.
Between all the sequels, remakes, spin-offs, and merch, Halloween's grossed over $100 billion worldwide since 1978, which makes it the most successful horror franchise in history, and it's had a huge impact on the culture of horror films.
Contemporary audiences are kind of split on how it's held up, and that's understandable, but lots of groundbreaking things might seem quaint in retrospect. Early cell phones, early cars, so context is everything. Halloween finally made it into the Library of Congress in 2006. Steve Leggett, the National Film Registry Staff Coordinator, put it this way.
He said, Halloween launched John Carpenter's career and started the slasher genre. Some people may say that's good or bad, but it's a really good film.
So that does it for our third episode on our Halloween special, and we really hope you like it. We had fun doing it. It's a little different than what we normally do, right?
Yeah. And if you haven't seen Halloween, or if you haven't seen it in a long time, give it another chance. It's really amazing. We watched it when we were doing research for the podcast, and it just really holds up.
It really does. And if you have any suggestions of new podcasts for us and want to tell us how great this was or how shit we are, you can reach out to us at
Taboo Treasures on Instagram and TikTok.
Or you can email us at tabootreasures@eviocreative.com. Hope to see you next week. Goodbye. From Evio, Taboo Treasures is produced by Bruce Witkin and Jeff Levine. Executive producer Brandon Morgan. Music by the Lonely Bulls.